Hello everyone and welcome to Divided Opinion, Spec Ops The Line. My name's Untogether. I should warn you up front, this video will have a small amount of spoilers. I think we're 5 chapters or so in, where we're going to start here. And the content in some of the game would probably be rated R or 18, so watch responsibly, bear that in mind while you're watching. Spec Ops is an FPS created by Jaeger development studio. The Spec Ops license was given to Jaeger after almost a decade. It was almost a 10-year break from the Spec Ops games, which featured on the PC, on the PlayStation and Dreamcast. Spec Ops games back in the day, they were never that good, frankly. They never scored very well on reviews. They never really seemed to sort of capture anybody's imagination. They were always trying to be, you know, this realistic kind of shooting game, and they never really found a market. There was a bunch of games, but they never really found their market. So Jaeger were given the license, and as long as I think, from what I understand, as long as they used the name Spec Ops, they had pretty much free reign to do whatever they wanted with it. And they broke completely from the series. Spec Ops The Line is set in Dubai, in the Middle East, after a series of sandstorms has made the place virtually uninhabitable. There was a battalion of US infantry, the 33rd. They were in the process of returning from active duty in Afghanistan when these storms hit, and their commander, Colonel John Conrad, volunteered them to go to Dubai to assist with the relief efforts. Months after their arrival, no one had been rescued. The 33rd hadn't been heard from. They were branded traitors. Nobody really knew what had happened in Dubai. And they seemed to close the book on that chapter. 6 months after the event, a cryptic radio message pertaining to be from the 33rd was heard from Dubai. It's a place that's now treated as no man's land. And so 3 soldiers were sent in to recon the situation, who are our 3 guys here. Walker, who's the playable character that you can see. And that's where we join in, with trying to find Conrad, trying to find the 33rd, and find out what's been going on here in Dubai. Spec Ops has definitely a split opinion among gamers, more so than any game of recent memory that I can think of. There seems to be a general agreement that the actual gameplay elements are a pretty standard first-person cover shooting. That element isn't really up to much. Personally, I think the complaints in this area they're perhaps a little overcooked. I think the game is more than functional. Control is tight. Aiming assisted when you're using a pad just the right amount, and the difficulty, if it's high, is good. It's a good challenge. There's an interesting use of sand. Since we're in Dubai and it's full of sandstorms, sand builds up on glass. You can break the glass, as we just saw there, to get through. It does, like I say, the game can offer a decent challenge. The shooting itself is reasonably satisfying. You can pull off quick headshots. There's a nice variety of weapons. It's nothing special, no, not at all. There are much better examples. Oops. Ow. Caught up in the visuals like you were. So yeah, it's perfectly functional as a shooter, nothing special, but just functional. The enemy AI is perhaps a little bit shonky. They opt to run straight at you rather suicidally more often than you might expect them to take cover or to flank. But again, it certainly won't win awards, but the gameplay, at least to my mind, it's probably not as bad as you've heard, or what you think it might be.
Check it out. Signs of the revolution. Bullshit's what it is. Dubai's dying and everyone's trying to help it along.
Under the sand, the pavement. It's pretty cryptic.
At least the Ravens ain't gonna starve.
What really divides opinion on this game is the storyline. You can't deny the setting. The setting's unique. You're walking through it right now.
Guy's been rotten too long.
Oh my god.
There's no denying the huge creative influence that this game draws from Heart of Darkness.
They spot us?
I mean, the main antagonist is named Conrad, for goodness sake. And like Far Cry 2 a little bit before it does use certainly Heart of Darkness as an influence, a big influence on this game. Certainly more so than Far Cry 2. It's the method though in this game of using the action to make you question your own actions, which is the game's main storytelling draw. There's an old axiom in writing fiction, show don't tell. And Spec Ops the line revels in rubbing your nose right in it, putting you in real close and making you take the time to understand that your actions have had consequences. Normally in shooters like this, you put the crosshair over a guy, you click the button, you pull the trigger, guy falls over. And that's the last you ever think about it, until you move on and you do that several hundred times. And while you'll do that several hundred times in this game, there are, on occasions, you have time to reflect on what you've done.
They're everywhere! Watch your flanks!
So as you're seeing from the action here, the third person stuff, it's very pretty and it's very, it is very functional. And there's nothing wrong with it. But as we say, the storyline is where we're going. So there are several ways that the game switches up from the usual sort of ethnic villain of the month that these kind of bro shooter type games usually have. First is that the enemy that you're fighting here, they're Americans, they're the same as you. These guys, these are the 33rd Division. These are the guys that went out there initially to help Dubai. And now, through various elements in the story, you find yourself attacking them. A number of times you'll creep up on 2 or 3 guys who are just chatting away, chatting in English about, you know, what they were doing earlier that day, what they planned to do a bit later. And usually, of course, you creep up on guys and they're speaking Russian or Farsi or, you know, whatever the flavour of the week is for bad guys. And so yeah, so that's the first point. That makes you think. The second point is that civilians are rife in this game. We passed a group of them earlier, dead on the floor, but you'll find live groups of civilians. You'll be forced to interact with them. You'll be forced to deal with some of them in certain cases. It doesn't mean to say you don't have a choice. There's a choice in pretty much everything that you do throughout the game, and that's kind of a part of this game's. You died there. That's kind of a part of this game's pull. Is that you are genuinely given choices as to how to do with people. There's no, press X to do this. More sand. There's no press X to complete this action. It's
Tell the 33rd to stand down. This is
you'll
helping no one.
you'll have two options. You help this guy or that guy. You walk away or you fight. What do you do? What do you do in those options?
I'm not the only one.
And so yeah, the civilians, they're just normal people. They're caught in a horrible situation. They're just trying to survive, and like I say, you're generally given free rein in your interactions with them. And again, you'll be asked to do things that will actively hurt them, but hurt a group of individuals, but may assist overall what's going on here, and you'll have to decide. And there are moments like this as well. Walking through a mass of corpses, flies buzzing all around.
No, not that.
Things have a very, violence has a very real consequence here. I'm about to see that over this next scene. Violence has a very real consequence. And scenes like this, they're pretty horrific. So the game has several beats of this type. You're meant to face your actions the actions of others. And this seems to be where most of the disagreement about Spec Ops lies. Some say that these moments are overhanded, they're obvious, they're telegraphed, they lose their shock value. Whereas others say that they're gut-wrenching, awful moments about where your lack of morality, the decisions that you made, that's pushed in your face. And again, it's how subjective, how susceptible rather you are to these moments. I really, really believe will absolutely define your enjoyment of Spec Ops: The Line. If you allow yourself to get drawn into it, if you allow yourself to get pulled in by the story, by the game, you will absolutely enjoy this game. Or maybe enjoy is the wrong word. A lot of people actively dislike, well, not dislike the game, but actively feel they're made to feel bad by the game. And they're made to think and they're made to question their relationship with this game and with video games in general. And that's perhaps what Spec Ops is trying to do. There's several more subtle ways than what we've just seen though, where the game makes you think about what you've done and your experience within it. There are lots of snippets that you see on the loading screens. They're the most obvious. They pointedly ask you questions about your experience. So, again, we're going to come up to a choice here, one that I'm not going to follow through. We're going to end just before.
Tell me where he is.
But there's a CIA agent that you need to talk to. It's this guy here, and you're offered a pretty stark choice as to whether you go after him or whether you help the civilians that are there with him. So the story itself, I think it weaves its way through many themes, but it basically comes back to one man's journey away from clarity and towards madness. And the breakdown is apparent in, it's the character that you control, it's apparent in his dialogue. He becomes more aggressive and deranged throughout the game. There's many shocking moments through the game, we've seen a couple of them just in this 10 minutes, but there's one specific scene that's taken all the headlines. That's not the only one by far. So I fell on the side of
Take care of the rest of them. Yes, sir.
Still have nothing to say.
I fell on the side of being wowed by Spec Ops, I really did. I've played more than enough shooters to know the tropes, and Spec Ops knows more than enough about the rules in order to be able to break them and twist. It was able to twist my expectations of what I was going to see. I really think Spec Ops is a game that should be played by anyone who enjoys shooters in general, even if only to form their own opinion about the proceedings. I do think familiarity with video game shooters is something that you might need, but this is one of those rare games that split opinion right down the middle. Doesn't that make it more interesting than trying to be all things to all men? Go play Spec Ops: The Line.